Leisa Peterson, a very, very warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Thank you, Jen. I'm so happy to be here.
I can't wait for this conversation. I kind of wish I'd have hit record about 5 minutes ago because we've just had a wonderful conversation and it feels like the old saying, singing from the same hymn sheet. We were finishing each other's sentences and stuff about spending money. So this is going to be really cool, right? I can't wait to have this conversation with you. And thank you for coming on all the way from the other side of the pond in Arizona. So can't wait to speak to you about your specialist subject, your book and your new book coming out. So yeah, let's crack on. I can't wait to get into it.
Great.
So Leisa, you've written a brilliant book that you were very kind to send over to me called The Mindful Millionaire. You've also got another book coming out, a bit of a fable type book. So I'm really interested for you just to let me know and tell the listeners how you got to where you are, what your journey looked like, what kind of inspired you or made you write The Mindful Millionaire and your follow-up book. And yeah, let us know about that, and we can then get into bits of the book and some of the things that I think are really juicy to talk about retirement.
I know we're going to talk about this more, but I will just come out of the closet and say the reason I'm so inspired by my work is because I lived a life of great scarcity up until the past handful of years ago. And I didn't know it at the time. Many people might not even know what that means. We'll dive into it, but I had a lack consciousness, and it started really early in my childhood. My parents knew very little about money. It was around the time that credit was really coming on board in the late 60s, early 70s. They didn't know how to manage it. We got into trouble and would lose cars and have to sell our house and all kinds of stuff that created a great deal of stress early in life with money. I know a lot of people can relate to that. And unfortunately, it set me up early in life to make a decision. I think around 8 or 9, when I learned about money, I was like really learned how it worked, or became obsessed with it, I should say. I was like, if I can have a lot of money, all my problems are going to go away and everything is going to be perfect. And that was the way that I approached life for many years. And as you know from reading the book, I faced several tragedies along the way with my family that kept waking me up to the fact that I had a problem, that I had really taken this story of rich equals better, life equals happiness, and that it kept chipping away at that belief system till ultimately 10, 11 years ago, I walked away from my financial advising practice to start teaching people more as an educator and as a coach about the relationship that we have with money, because inspired by my own suffering.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how, well, it's not interesting, it's interesting and ultimately happens to all of us, how our childhood, the way we live our childhood and what's ingrained in us from a childhood is really kind of stays with us for a long time and influences so many of our behaviors and so many of our thoughts, and often starts driving our purpose and our passions to kind of at some point to maybe go against what we learned and what we were taught. And I think a lot of people listening to this that are approaching their retirements would have very similar stories around, maybe things are holding them back that is from the past and maybe quite a long time ago, right? If you're in your 50s and 60s, to maybe revisit when you were 10 is maybe not even something you'd even think about doing. But quite often we're going to talk about spending money and scarcity and shifting our mindset. Your own trials and life events that you've been through, and your own experience working with clients, that must be something you see and hear every day around, how our past behaviors, our learnt beliefs are really affecting us many, many years down the line when it comes to money and how our money impacts our lives.
Every single day.
Mm.
I feel like I do it with, the people that I meet, the clients that I've had. It was really going back to when I was a financial advisor that these conversations even started, because what happened was I had worked with people in money now for over 30 years. I had become a self-made, my husband and I, self-made for what that's worth, millionaire 24 years ago. So that obsession with money had worked. But then here I am with my financial advising clients, and they were doing all these very strange things. And what I mean by that is it was obvious that there were things they could do that would better themselves, but they couldn't do it over and over again. And I started asking my clients, okay, let's just do this really weird thing. How about we just get together for an hour and you tell me like your life story through the lens of money? And I just want to listen to that. And when I started having those conversations back in 2010, 2011, folks would start to make dramatic changes in their lives just by having that conversation, because nobody had ever asked them that before and held space for it. So yes, I hear this all the time.
Do you know what I find really interesting? The fact that you were a financial advisor, and you had a successful business, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here. This may not have happened, but I think this is what happened. When you suddenly realize that money problems and financial problems are not necessarily solved by more money and more financial stuff, right? It's kind of, you don't solve an issue with money or with spending by showing them more spreadsheets, by showing them more numbers, this has to be conversational, it has to be coaching. And I think sometimes people, financial advisors and the public, people that are doing this stuff themselves, think that the issues around money and retirement and investing and their thought process around money is solved by more money stuff. But it's not, right? I mean, it's completely opposite to that.
It really is. There's also, what we're talking about is this mindset that we hold. And what I want to say to this is it's weird because we think mindset and we think like the brain and we think logic, but actually mindset is totally emotional. And I can give everyone an example of this is just in this moment, think about something that makes you very uncomfortable spending money on. It has nothing to do with the money. It is all emotion.
Yeah. Absolutely. A story from yesterday when I met a client, they were, they've got more money. They're never going to spend it all. I tell them that all the time. And she kind of started saying, well, they're going into London to watch more shows and doing more things and they really love it, but it's costing them 300, 400 pounds at a time. And and I just don't see the value, the money. She's associated 400 pounds with a monetary value. And I made her step back and write down all of the things that she got emotional value out of it. And then she wrote them all down and then was like, oh no, it's worth it, isn't it? Well, yeah, it's not, if you're not trading money, you're trading emotions, you're trading experiences. And I think that's in your book, you talk about the shift, right? From the shift from a scarcity to a prosperity mindset. And I think that's part of that shift. Scarcity is, I think, in numbers. I think prosperity is in emotions and experiences. So I'd really like to, you do really go into the importance of that scarcity mindset shift. If people are listening to this and they are worried about, one of the big fears of retirement is running out of money. How can they begin to think about and cultivate a prosperity mindset and feel, that they are financially secure, regardless of kind of what's in their bank account and regardless of how they kind of value their money?
It really comes down to spending more time thinking about what it is that you have than what it is you don't have. And we live in a society that's oriented to comparison, to consumerism, to, buy more things, get greater happiness. And it's true, we get a little lift when we spend money, but what we don't spend enough time on is understanding that lift, right? That moment of inspiration, that feel good feeling is something that you can create and not have it related to your spending. Like you decide what it is that brings you great joy. You have to know what it is that brings you great joy. And granted, I would say it does bring me joy to know that I have a great financial plan and it makes sense that we're going to be okay. I love to tell people, by the way, just cuz I'll interject it every chance I can, I have enough. Proudly, I have enough to last me for the rest of my life. As long as we're smart, we make good decisions, I have enough. But me saying I have enough in this moment is me doing what I'm suggesting everyone do. Focus on what it is you have, even if you are not totally sure. When I first started saying that, people would criticize me. People on my team would be like, if you tell people that, nobody's going to want to buy anything from you. And I was like, well, if that's the risk, like that's ridiculous. But I was like, I need to get comfortable saying this out loud so I can own it and fully embody it. That's what we're
Yeah.
doing with everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you talk a lot about kind of connecting money to values and aligning those values with your financial decisions. And I suppose I suppose when we think about that, this is about, I suppose, redefining your success, right? Redefining what's most important to you, and then aligning those decisions with that. And I don't think enough people do that work, right? I've said to people before, during when we're working and we might be employed, etc., we're kind of spoon fed our purpose. We're spoon fed a lot of stuff because we get on the treadmill. So we haven't done that work really in our lives, and we approach our second half of life, we get into our 50s, mid 50s, we think about this next phase, and yet we've never really, I think, properly thought about what brings us proper happiness and joy and we love to do. And so how do you think around looking at how you redefine what success means to you, how we align those values with our financial decisions? What can that do to people if they do that well? What does that enable them to really achieve?
The first thing that just comes to mind here is I have faced a lot of very difficult circumstances, even so recent. I'm 58. My husband's the same age. So a few years ago, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He's fine now. He's gone through all of the treatment. He's doing incredible. But like, I will say that it shouldn't have to take that sort of thing happening to us in life. Like, learn from me, learn from my husband. As soon as it happened, we changed a whole mess of stuff in our lives really fast. I shut down most of my business that had been taking off. Even as a self employed person, I was like, that's not my priority. And what we did was we started prioritizing our own joy and our own happiness. And yes, we had to get through his treatment, but we were like, always wanted to go to New Zealand. Now's the time. Now we're going back a second time. Like, he's a little slower. I'm really good at being the cheerleader of like deciding something and just testing it, because you don't always know that something's going to be the thing that's going to bring you great joy. But I'm willing to try it once, and he's willing to come along when I'm very persuasive. And I've just learned that this is about trial and error, looking at the things that have brought you great joy in the past and thinking, well, what would equate to that now from where I stand? I'm not sure. Am I answering your question? It's just,
Yeah, no, you are absolutely. Do you know what I'm really interested in? And you can share this from a personal view if you want
yeah.
to, but also from the work that you do and have done. Why do you think it takes something like that? Because I see it a lot, right? The reason why people come to work with us is often baked in some sadness, right? It's kind of like I've lost someone, or someone's being diagnosed with some big event seems to happen for us to take stock and move forward, when in fact I think we should all try and take stock and move forward with aligning what we want to do and how we want to do it and who we want to do it with. Before, like you said, before that, is there any insights that you can share to go, actually, why is it to do with our past? Is it to do with what we've learned? Is it to do with societal kind of expectations? Is it everything? What do you think this kind of is all about?
I think that at the core of being human, there are deep set fears of doing life wrong in some way. And I think that we get so caught up in the story of what our life is supposed to look like, that we, at some point along the way, we allow this fear of maybe I'm going to do it wrong to infect our whole way of being. And it's really tough to break out of it because it's so close to, like, we just don't even notice that we're doing it. And so when tragedy happens, when challenges are faced, if we're lucky, there's this like moment of time where the fear overcomes us, because that's how we respond as human beings. And then for me, like, I was at one of these horrible shootings that we unfortunately have far too often in the United States. And this man looked at me and said, "You might want to leave now," and pulled out this gun. And I say in the book about what happened to me as I was trying to get out of the building was everyone, it was just chaos, people running everywhere. And I froze. And in that moment, I was like, I am absolutely terrified. And what if I'm not this fear? Like, I had this split second of just like, wait a minute, this isn't really who I am. Like, yes, I want to live, but I saw it. Like, I saw my whole life flash before me. And it was wild because I was like, I don't want to live that way anymore. Like, I am living from a place of fear, even though people would look at me and my whole life, they would look at me and say, "You are one of the most courageous people I know." And in that moment, I was like, I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so true. I think the word fear is the right word. And I think, a lot of people they make decisions based on the fear of money in a way that, I think if you said to someone, "What's your number? Here it is." I think a lot of people want to make these decisions, but they're fearful of, well, what if that happened? What if, am I going to be able to survive? Am I going to do this? And money is often at the root of this. And it really doesn't matter. And you mentioned this in the book. It really doesn't matter how much you've got, right? The number is irrelevant. There's a whole load of research done. If you ask someone how much is enough, they pretty much say double what they've got, no matter what their wealth is, because we haven't done, as we said at the start, that real deep work in understanding what we truly value. And my own experiences, both myself and with my clients, is it's often a lot less than what you think, right? It doesn't, what you truly value, what you do, what you want to do with your time doesn't actually cost that much, really, in general. So, you talk about this, mindfulness, and practicing mindfulness really helps people be more resilient to financial fears, because what you talk about is shifting away from what they lack to the opportunities and resources they already have. You mentioned that, right? It's kind of like, think about what you've got and what opportunities you have. So that can obviously be really empowering when it comes to retirement planning. If you think about what you've got, what opportunities that you've got going forward, and trying to be resilient to the fears that will always come about as human beings around, well, what if that doesn't work? But I want you to pick up on this point. What I love you said is that just try it, right? I mean, what's just trial and error? No one knows if it's going to be correct or it's going to be right or wrong. So give it a go.
Yeah. Well, everything that I've learned, especially since starting my own business, is that there's a ton of things I don't know, and I had to really come to terms with that. I feel like owning a business teaches you don't really know as much as you thought. But if we apply that to like our whole entire lives, we don't really know as much as we think we know. So you open yourself in life to curiosity and you run with it. And I just think that every time I get curious, I learn something new and I make my life better in some way. But also, something that was coming up as you were speaking that I feel like is important. And I've been together with my husband since college, and we both had this scarcity mindset. And because I've been doing this work for all these years, it's obviously, I mean, thankfully, it's helping me a lot, but he's not necessarily inside of it like I am all the time. And one of the things that we've kind of created a relationship of being very, very outspoken, me and him, about the fears and the concerns and like talking about them out loud. So then we can, going back to like a financial plan, he looks at a financial plan very different than I do coming from my background. I show him the financial plan and he just gets really, really skeptical. Whereas I am like, no, I've really researched this. I know that these numbers are right. So what I've learned is I need to show him that financial plan on a regular basis. I need to talk about what it means. I need to show him how that works in real life terms. And then when we go on trips and we spend money, like explain what that means in a context that works for him because he's not the same person as me. And so I'm trying to bring him into the curiosity, but I need to help him more. And I feel like a lot of couples are like us, where one is maybe trying to push it a little bit more than the other. And so that curiosity is important.
One thing comes to mind when you said that it's really interesting when you talk about what you essentially said. It's kind of a numbers versus a stories thing. And I want everybody listening to understand this, right? And we are fortunate, Leisa, as financial professionals, that numbers have slightly different, although I would say I'm less of a numbers person than what people would ever believe me to be, right? I'm much more of a story. But human beings like stories. We are storytellers. We are story listeners, if that's a thing. But for the vast majority of people, numbers do not resonate. Actually, they sit in the side of our brain that is one that basically questions it. It doesn't believe them. So we question numbers. We don't believe numbers. We think numbers can be manipulated and we don't like them. What we do love is stories. On the other side of our brain, we love the stories come in and we believe them and we can resonate with them. And so my biggest tip out there is to go, actually, I think a retirement plan, a financial plan, sounds really stupid, is so much more about stories than it is about numbers, right? If you're just presented with numbers, you're not going to believe them. If I tell someone that they can spend £100,000 or $100,000 a year every year and show that on a spreadsheet, they won't believe me. They just won't believe me. The brain is going in overdrive and it won't work. But if I connect that to a story, if I connect that to experiences, if I connect that to meaning and get them in there, it then starts, it starts opening up. So I think it's really interesting when we start talking about our emotional awareness and response to this stuff. Is that experiences that you've kind of come across?
50%, but I'm getting so many ideas by what you're saying, just like writing notes. The whole reason that my new book is written as a fictional parable is because of the power of story. I feel like people will be able to resonate, and we don't talk about numbers. We just talk about like, what is this life that you want to create and what's keeping you from creating it? So much of my work has been around the blocks that keep people stuck in place. Like what processes, what therapy, what information is going to help you get out of your own way. But what I also thought was, imagine if, yes, you have a financial plan, you work with someone such as yourself to come up with this plan. Imagine if part of that process is building out the story to support that plan. Like that's way more interesting. I totally hear you.
Yeah. I do. We were talking before we hit record around the problems of people spending money, and I do think that's, as we said, a big reason why people have, why they experience anxiety or guilt around spending money. They experience a feeling, they experience an emotive reaction, often negative, towards spending money. And it doesn't make sense, right? Because as we said, they've worked so hard for a long period of time to get to a point where they have an option to spend their money, yet all the emotional overload that they then face around trying to draw this thing down that they've spent so much time saving it takes over. How, in your experience, how can, mindfulness and how can being emotionally aware help people understand and overcome those hurdles around spending to help them enjoy this part of their life to its fullest?
One of the practices that comes to mind, and we can call it a mindfulness practice, is to have something like stop, take a breath, observe, proceed. And with mindfulness, it's all about just slowing things down, right? being mindful enough that you catch yourself in the moment of fear. You know what's happening inside of your body when you're not okay. Like just that one thing. We feel great, and then all of a sudden we're not okay. What just happened? Why did you change? What's going on? Where do you feel it in your body? Because if you don't train yourself to pay attention to those repetitive patterns, you won't be able to catch yourself and do this technique, right? Stop, breathe, observe, proceed. And mindfulness is something that you could do by having a meditation practice, breathing in the morning. Like there's not a whole mess of ways that we can get there, but we have to understand that we live in a society, particularly with all the gadgets and all the accessibility and technology, that our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. And it's up to each of us to learn how to counteract what these devices are doing to our brain. They're not engineered for what's happening, and yet we're dealing with it. I think they're taking a toll on our health. And it helps a lot to have a practice that causes you to go inward, to not be paying attention to all the noise out there. Focus on how you're feeling in your body, your breath. It will pay off.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love the point about slowing down. I think it's, just being aware, as you said, and slowing down. I think everything moves at 100 miles an hour. And particularly for, if I think about, people that work hard and have been successful, their careers have probably moved at 100 miles an hour. And it's getting faster and over time. And in order to make, and we've talked about decision making, in order to make better decisions that are fully aligned with your values and your purpose and priorities, you can't make them quickly because it takes a little bit of thought. And actually, I think if you think about it in a way, if they've been buried for 30 years, they're buried deep enough for you to have to work a bit harder to get them, right? This is not they weren't there 3 years ago and I lost them and they're a little bit fresh, and these are buried probably deep enough that it will take weeks, months, years to feel like, and you've got to give yourself space and time and slow down to reach them. Totally agree. I want to talk about actually thinking about this values, personal values, purpose, priorities. In the book, you talk about aligning your financial choices with personal values. So for someone that's approaching or in their second half of life, in their retirement, stopped work, and now they're spending their money on this stuff, I think people struggle in connecting their spending habits and aligning them and reflecting their purpose and priorities. Have you got any thoughts around how people can think about that, and any tips around how they can connect their spending with their deeper purpose and priorities?
There's really two ways to do this. One is to spend time writing down, let's say 5 of the top values, your top personal values. And then go to your credit card statements, your bank statements, and see how you're auditing your spending with those values to make sure that they're aligned. And then when I said that you could do it 2 ways, you could just go pay attention to what you're spending and then have it tell you what your values are. But I don't know about you, but I would rather have it be values first, spending second, than my spending being in charge. Yeah.
Yeah, I would absolutely love it to be that way. It all depends, though, doesn't it? Right? I mean, it's like, I think it's really interesting. I've said a couple of times, you might. I've said to clients, and I've put it out on social, something very similar. This kind of like, what you tell me your values are you will only show me by showing me your bank statement, right? It's kind of, and actually, I do think there is a massive disconnect. If you want to get deep on this, do exactly what Leisa just said, because that is the only way it's going to tell you. And don't do it backwards, because if I look at my bank statement, it will show how obsessed I am with buying pointless golf equipment. Right? That's kind of where it's going to be. Now, there is a passion of mine. I do get purpose out of it. I also get really frustrated. It's not necessarily a priority. I could definitely be spending my money a lot wiser. So I think you can reverse engineer that, right? Because on a serious note, I love golf. So I could look at that and go, well, of course that's a priority for me, but actually it's not, right? If you look the other way and you think about those values, and again, you don't make that switch overnight. You need to be intentional and focused on making sure that bit by bit, your bank statement is actually demonstrating what you've written down on that bit of paper. I think that is a wonderful tip.
And then what do you do about it, right? That's the next step, because you can get that information and maybe not make any changes. So I think it also, my guess is we're all going to learn. If we do this exercise, we're going to learn some changes we want to make. But then the next step would be writing out, like, these are the 5 ways that I am going to hold myself accountable to changing this behavior.
Yeah. If we stay on that a little bit, because I think it's really interesting, but do you think people are really, really fearful about confronting that? So, I don't really want to look what's on the credit, and particularly if you live your life on credit cards, right? I think there's a very different between maybe a bank statement and a credit card statement. Do you think they just don't want to, I suppose a couple of things, confront reality about what this is? They understand that if they confront the reality, there's going to be some harsh lessons and truths and some, learning to be done. And also, I think confronting this reality as a couple without trying to kind of make people have arguments about this. I think, there are lots of couples that hide this stuff from one another. And it's a really challenging exercise to do. My point, I suppose, is if you're going into retirement as a couple, and if you're still going to hide all that stuff from one another, you're going to have a pretty rubbish time, I think, right? So what do you think people need to do to maybe get over that? And that's a harsh word. You don't just get over something, but like, it's a real challenge for people that know that they've got something to hide in brackets. What's the ways we could really start to think about the importance of doing this and get over some of those fears and scarcity mindset stuff?
I think it's important what you're saying, to normalize the fear that it's real and that it's likely to be there. So I love that you mentioned that. I want to compare it to something recently I did, because I think our own personal stories are always most effective than me just telling everyone what they should do. So last summer, I decided that I was dealing with some very strange health challenges. And I've always been really healthy and in great shape and work out and take good care of myself. But I have never had to focus that much on my eating behaviors. And I saw a friend who looked like she was in a reverse aging machine. And I said to her, "What are you doing? You look like 10 years younger than the last time I saw you. How is that even possible?" And it wasn't because of stuff, just to be clear, like in her face. She was like, "You're not going to like it, but I'm working with this Ayurvedic doctor and he's got me on this diet and it's changed my whole life." And long story short, I bit the bullet, as they say, and I started working with this doctor 5, 6 months ago. I wrote on my intake form, I don't know if anybody's ever done this with you, Dan, but just to be clear of how painful this was, I wrote, "I absolutely hate every moment of the idea of what we're about to do." And when we got on the Zoom call together, he's like, "Do you need to talk more about that?" And I was like, "No, I think I said it all. Like, I'm really pissed off. I don't want you to change my eating behavior. I don't want you to tell me all the things that I need to change. Like, I don't want it, but I'm willing to try. Like, I've gotten to the point where I'm willing to try." And so the first month, my poor husband had to listen to me moan and complain and everything else. And the second month, it was a little less. And the third month, it pretty much had mostly gone away. And now, 6 months later, I am healthier and far thinner, which wasn't the point of it, than I probably have ever been in my whole entire life by changing my eating behavior. And I am grateful to that person I was 6 months ago and all the suffering she went through, because she didn't actually know that it was going to work. She didn't know it was going to help. She didn't know she was going to feel so much better, but she was willing to try. And I am never going back.
So cool. And I mean, as you said, as a story, just replace diet with money. And, it's, and you and I would have seen this when we worked with people. you can see maybe one of the couple wants to be there, the other one really, really, really does not, and is so uncomfortable, and it doesn't want to be. And in fact, I think quite often both of them don't want to be there. Like you said, very similar. It's kind of like, I feel like I should know I should be able to do this. I don't really know why I'm here. I know I've got a bit of a problem. I don't want to open up about money to you. Just solve the problem, right? Solve the problem. And then we turn around and go, well, I can't solve the problem until you kind of do the opening up thing. So we're just going to keep going around and you know what I mean? And it's really challenging. I've said this on the podcast before. It sticks with me for ages. It stuck with me forever. Sorry. I hadn't been qualified that long, and I sat down with this couple and we're having a really good conversation. And she said, when I come into the office, Dan, in my head, I was thinking to myself, I would be more comfortable talking about my sex life than money. I mean, it's like, she said, it's literally the worst thing I could be talking about. I'd rather be talking about some other stuff that it makes me anxious just thinking about it, but money makes me even more anxious. And yeah, it's just fascinating how our mindset takes us to a point where we, as you said, we don't want to be there. We don't want to talk about it. But your story is really inspirational because, as you said, you're now looking back and going, actually, I'm grateful for that process. And I don't know anyone that I've worked with professionally, and probably you've worked with professionally, that's come out the other side and gone, actually, I'm worse off than I was before. Right. So we know it works. People just need to kind of, that initial bit's a real big challenge for people to get over.
I'll also add, because food and money, very similar. Along the way, I realized that the doctor had this very absolute 100% idea of what I was supposed to do. And I was like, that's not me. Like, I like to be a bit of a rebel, So I've got my 80-20 or 90-10, in place where I can have those things. They're just not in my diet every day. And back to something you said earlier, it doesn't have to be about absolutes. Like, even with the scarcity mindset, our frugality that many of us have treasured forever, it's a badge of honor. And there are going to be times when you're like, I want to be frugal and I don't want to do this. And I celebrate that. I celebrate me having my gluten heaven experiences. It's okay that you're going to find your own path. Don't make it extremes, because that actually is a scarcity mindset, just to make it one or the other.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind is control, right? Human beings love control. And I think if even if you've got 10 or 20% control, you'll do the 90 or 80, which is going to massively benefit you. If we feel like we're going to lose 100% control, then we'll walk away from the situations, right? So I think it's really important when people start to think about their retirements. This isn't about losing control. This isn't about losing who you were. This is about the new beginning. This is about taking ownership. And it's okay to get it 80% or 90% right and have someone help you with your blind spots, right? The reason why a lot of reasons why people will work with me, and I work with a lot of people that could do this themselves, right? We are very close to the City of London, they've got a big institution capital. I work with a lot of people that are experts in managing money, and one of the reasons they come and work with me is because I'm not them. By definition, blind spots are blind spots, and we all have them. So it's okay to let someone in and help you for 10 or 20% of that, or for 70 or 80% of that. As long as you've got a little bit of control, you're going to do pretty well.
So true.
I really want to talk about money stories with you. I think I love the term. I would imagine people hearing that term that have never heard it before will kind of feel a little bit sick. It's kind of like, what money stories? What it's kind of like, it seems a little bit out there, but it's so true, because our past money stories, and what they deliver to us in form of limited beliefs and learnt behaviors, which, by the way, in general, every kind of thing I've heard has been on a negative side, right? Because when we look at our parents and our grandparents, for instance, they had such different lives to what we have now. And if I think about retirement specifically, their retirement, you can't even compare, right? These are apples and oranges. So if we're allowing their philosophy around retirement, their philosophy around life, and their philosophy around money, which was so much different then than it is now, limit us and guide us, we're going to be stuck in unhealthy financial patterns. So how can people in retirement or approaching retirement identify that and almost, I suppose, rewrite those stories in order to think about a healthier relationship with money, particularly in their second half of life?
It has a lot to do with identifying the messages that were coming through early in life. So a lot of times I'll ask questions like, what was happening in the home when you were growing up? What did your mom believe about money? What did your father believe about money? How was money treated when you were in those formative years? And even just answering those simple questions help us to start to understand the formative money story. Then you can fill in, well, what happened with that? Where did you go from there? What were the defining moments financially that helped you get where you are? And at the same time, when you look back at that path, if we have children, sometimes I see that people will spend more time doing this because they're like, I do not want to pass some of these things on to my children. So you look at this so that you can go and have conversations even with adult children and say, can we talk about some things that I've since learned probably I wouldn't have taught you way back, having conversations. So to me, doing a little bit of that journaling, having conversations with partners, with children, with parents, if they're still alive, helps you build out the information. But then what you get the opportunity to do as you put your story of the past down, you can start to say, well, okay, if I had a magic wand, right? And I could start again today, which by the way, we can. What do I want that story to look like going forward? Are there some things that I'm carrying with me that I really, really don't want anymore? And that's the work that I do with my clients. I give them an opportunity to say, do you want to take this belief forward or do you actually want to let it go? And it's not quite that simple, but it is because sometimes, like you said, people need mirrors and they need support to be like, you can actually let it go. It is a choice. You created it when you were young. And what I mean by that is, even though you learned it maybe from a parent or from the economic situation you grew up in, you are the one who decided that story. You took it upon yourself and you kept it going. And we know this too because our siblings often grew up in the same home and yet they have different money stories.
For sure. Yeah.
So,
yeah. And what's really interesting, I think, is that often people just need to understand that they're not alone. So they might have this limiting belief about something. But when you say to them something on the lines of, oh, yeah, no, I've got 10 other people that have that. And you're not alone. And it's perfectly normal. And it's not irrational for you to feel like this. Of course, you're going to feel like that. And when people realize that it's not just them, there are other people out there that feel like this, and there is a way out of it. Again, the story point of this, I think that's so transformational. A big tip I would say to people thinking about their retirement: just go and talk to people. There isn't a blueprint for this, so go and find people that have been through it and go and ask them questions. It's really interesting. I think so many people want to talk about their experiences to help others because they know how challenging this part of life is. And when you hear the stories of other people, I think it can help you so much in understanding that it's normal to feel like it. It's okay. There's a way out of it. I'm not the only one that can't spend their money. There's 150 other people that I've kind of got on a forum and we're having these conversations. Wisdom is in the masses, right? We can kind of gather some of that information and help ourselves.
yes.
I really, as we wrap up, and I might ask you to do the impossible here because you've got a whole section of your book dedicated to the brilliant I prosper process. So, I mean, if we can somehow in a 5-minute period understand and ask you to sum that up, because I think it's wonderful, right? And I think it's, it's an 8-step process. And I think it really can help people approach financial planning from a holistic, point of view, integrating attention, emotions, growth, And particularly for people in retirement, how they can approach this and help balance, I suppose, financial concerns with emotional well-being. So, yeah, if you don't mind, a whistle-stop tour of what I Prosper stands for, and why it's a wonderful framework to think about. And by the way, your book, everyone can buy the book and read this, so don't give it all away.
Yeah, it's so funny. We do home exchange, and there's a couple here in Sedona at our house next door that's from Ireland, and my book was there, and they're in retirement, and they were talking about this process last night as they were telling me that they're reading the book. So it's so funny that we're talking about it. So I Prosper is really a culmination of all of my work around mindfulness practice, as well as looking inside and helping people to understand those blocks that they keep repeating, like problems that keep coming up over and over again. Those things show themselves in our relationships with our partners, in our relationship with our parents, in our relationship with ourselves, and also with our children. So I'm helping people identify what those patterns are through diagnostic questions. And then it takes you on a journey to ultimately writing down what does matter to you. What do you value? What do you want that story to be going forward? What also is interesting for me, having been a financial advisor, is as it comes towards the end, it's like I had a lot of fun putting this idea of building a financial house together. And while your audience might not need it as bad as some people do, I think younger people especially, but this idea that you could think of planning your life out from the ground up as it pertains to like all your financial assets and how do you take care of everything. And it's very comprehensive. I've never seen anyone approach it from that perspective, but it's probably a good review. I don't know. You could let me know, but to check and make sure that the things that are important to you are in place. So it goes from inner experience to the outer experience. And the 8 steps is meant to take you through that if you're up and willing.
And I suppose if there is one, I really love the flow of it, right? Kind of, and I Prosper is an anagram for the steps: intention, pattern, reclaiming your feelings, opportunity, story, which we talked about loads, permission, evidence, and then the last one, reinvent your life. I'm really interested in the last one, right? Because I think, if you think about intention and the patterns and thinking about your feelings and creating some growth around opportunities and looking at all that data to support that, what's the end one? How do people then go, well, do you know what? I've kind of done the work. Well, I felt like I've done some work. It's time to reinvent my life. What does that look like for me?
I think it's a lot of what my husband and I have been doing this past few years, which is being really, really clear with each other about what does it mean to live our best life? You only have so much time. You have no idea when that could be taken from you. And I feel like it has to do with starting with this, that every single moment of the rest of our life is extremely precious. And you owe it to yourself to, get off of the social media or get off of the things that aren't necessarily making you happy, spend less time with those things, and orient to each and everything that does bring you great joy. And when they do research, and I know you've had folks on your podcast before, but when they do research about like meaning to life, it comes back to relationships over and over and over again. And we are not spending enough time inside of our relationships. And I will say this, one of my clients for years is a relationship specialist. She works with couples, and one of her classes that I took several years ago was all about defensiveness. And I was helping her put this class together, thinking, I'm going to help her get this out to the world. And one day when we brought it to the world and we were doing the first call, she said something and I started crying because I was like, Leisa, I need your class. I have a defensiveness problem. And thank God I don't say that anymore because it just by working with her, but like when I say we don't spend enough time in our relationships, it's because we have not figured out the protocol to have radically beautiful, connected relationships that are fully present to each other, including the problems, including the difficulties. And so that training with her for, a few months ended up changing my relationship with my children, with my husband. I can't even believe that I had the risk of continuing relationships like they were. But that meant me looking inside and saying, maybe this isn't good enough. And my family wasn't going to tell me. They love me, they like me, they accept me. But man, watch out, because the person I became by doing that work was like a completely different person. And I'm guessing everyone has things that they could learn to become better in their relationships. And it starts with you. And that's how you reinvent your life, or you reinvent money, because money and relationships, just like health of our body, it's like the three-legged stool.
Leisa, that's honestly such profound insight. I've said it before on this show. There's a rewind button that goes back 30 seconds on most podcasts. Hit that 2 or 3 times and re-listen to what Leisa just said, because I think that is such amazing insight. And that, I think, is a wonderful place to kind of leave the conversation. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, spending some time with me. I can't wait to read your new book. For everyone listening, Leisa's book, The Mindful Millionaire, will be in the show notes to obviously go and buy. I highly recommend it. And then when your new book is out, we'll make sure that that's available too. So listen, thank you so much. And I can't believe that we've kind of met. And I'm sure we're going to have many more conversations, because as we said, we do end up finishing each other's sentences. So that'd be quite cool. Leisa, thank you so much for taking time out and sharing all this with us today.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening.
And that just leaves me to once again thank you all for tuning in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Until next time, take care.